there is a wound most people never name. Not a wound from one specific moment, not one event, one person, or one failure, but something deeper. Something at the very floor of the soul. Something that happened before you had words for it. A crack in the foundation. A feeling that you were somehow too much and not enough at the same time. And here is what nobody tells you. Every deep, intuitive personality carries this wound. The INFJ carries it, the INFP carries it, the INTJ carries it, and the INTP carries it. We are all, in this sense, wounded souls. But each one does something completely different with the wound. Because the wound is not the problem. The wound is the same. What differs is the armor, and the armor is what we call personality. Today, we are going inside the 4 deep intuitive types, not to label you, but to understand what you are actually defending against, and what it might cost you if you never look. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The wound lives at the depth of the soul. The armor lives in plain sight. And the tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives polishing the armor, never realizing the wound beneath it is still bleeding. Let us begin. If you are an INFJ, you feel everything, not metaphorically, neurologically. When someone near you is in pain, your nervous system registers it almost as your own pain. You are built for empathy the way some people are built for mathematics. It is not a choice, it is a structure. It is simply what you are. And so when the wound arrived, when you were young, and the world made it clear that your inner world was too vast, too strange, too intense, you did something elegant and devastating at the same time. You turned outward. You made your pain useful. You became the one who listens, the one who absorbs, the one who carries the emotional weight of every room you enter. You became the keeper of wounded souls. And here is the shadow that no one ever names for you. You can only feel your own wound through other people's wounds. To sit alone with your own pain, unmediated, without the buffer of someone else's crisis to attend to, that is the thing that terrifies you most. Because in that silence, you might have to descend to a place in the soul you have never let yourself reach. You might have to ask, who am I when I am not helping? Who am I when there is no one to heal? You are as ancient as Chiron, the centaur who taught gods and heroes but could not heal his own wound. He gave everything outward and kept the wound intact, private, sacred, and burning. A wounded soul who made his wound into a gift, but never into a liberation. And perhaps you recognize that. The giving that never stops. The quiet resentment that no one absorbs your pain the way you absorb others. The relationships you stayed in long past the point of health because leaving would have meant abandoning someone who needed you. That is not a character flaw, that is the shadow of the deepest empathy in the room. Integration for you is not less empathy. It is learning that your own soul has the same dignity as the souls you spend your life tending. The healer must one day become the patient. Same wound. But now watch what happens when it turns inward instead of outward. The INFP does not run toward other people's pain. They run into their own. And then they do something no other type does. They make it into a myth. If you are an INFP, you do not just feel pain. You personalize it. You reach into the deepest chamber of the soul and pull out a story. And the story usually goes something like this. I was never truly seen. I was born into the wrong world. I am, at some essential level, alone in a way others cannot understand. And here is what makes you extraordinary, and what makes this dangerous at the same time. You are right that you carry something rare. Your capacity to transform personal pain into art, into meaning, into vision, this is genuinely uncommon. You are one of the wounded souls who makes the most extraordinary things from their pain. But the shadow is seductive. You can fall in love with the wound, not consciously, but the wound becomes identity, Being misunderstood becomes the story you tell yourself so often that you begin to unconsciously ensure it remains true. You choose people who cannot quite reach you. You step back from connection at the precise moment it becomes real. Because if someone truly saw you, fully, completely, and still chose you, what would happen to the myth of the orphan? You are the divine orphan, the one whose exile feels cosmically meaningful, the one who believes deep down that the suffering marks you as different as carrying something the world is not yet ready for. And maybe it does. But Jung would call this an inflation of the wound. The pain is no longer something that happened to you, it has become what you are. Integration for you is one of the most courageous acts the psyche can perform, to let yourself be seen without the myth, to allow ordinary, imperfect love to reach the soul without dismissing it as insufficient, to discover that you are not the wound, you are the one who survived it. If this is landing somewhere real for you, this channel goes deep into exactly this kind of psychology, not surface level, but the kind that actually changes how you understand yourself. Subscribe if you have not already. There is much more where this is going. Both the INFJ and the INFP feel the wound deeply. They live inside it, each in their own way. But what happens when the soul decides it will not feel at all? If you are an INTJ, you have spent years convincing the world, and perhaps yourself, that you have no wound at all. You are composed, strategic, precise. You have built a structure of competence and self-sufficiency so complete that most people never imagine there is anything beneath it. And perhaps that is exactly how you want it. But the wound is there. It arrived the same way it always does. You were too sensitive for a world that did not know what to do with sensitivity. Too perceptive in environments that punished perception. Too interior in a culture built for the exterior. And your response was total, brilliant and total. You went inside, but not to feel, to build. You constructed a fortress of the mind, systems, frameworks, long-range plans, contingencies, control. And inside that fortress, the wound was sealed away in a part of the soul you reclassified as irrelevant, labeled inefficiency, filed and forgotten. You are the ghost in the fortress, the hermit, but the hermit in shadow. Not the wise elder who withdraws to find truth, but the one who withdraws to avoid it. The true hermit carries a lantern. They go into the dark to illuminate it. But you went into the dark and locked the door. And here is what that cost you. Quietly, over years, you become a ghost in your own life. Extraordinarily functional, extraordinarily competent, and yet, somewhere behind the fortress walls, a soul that has not spoken in years. You are more comfortable with complexity in the outer world than with ambiguity in your inner one. You can tolerate not knowing the solution to a global problem, but you cannot tolerate not knowing why you feel what you feel, and so you stopped asking. Integration for you is not softness. It is not dismantling the fortress. It is picking up the lantern. It is entering your own inner world with the same rigor and courage you bring to everything else. Not because it is easy, but because it is the one frontier you have been systematically avoiding. The mind that can model everything has not yet modeled itself. The INFJ absorbs, the INFP mythologizes, the INTJ seals the door, and then there is the INTP, the one who does something that looks on the surface like the bravest thing of all. They look directly at the wound. If you are an INTP, you have looked directly at the wound. You have examined it, categorized it, built theoretical frameworks around it. You can describe the psychological mechanics of your own pain with a precision that would impress a clinician. You know exactly why you are the way you are. You have mapped the wound from every conceivable angle, and you still have not felt it. This is the paradox that lives at your center. You are the most intellectually honest of all the types, and yet you are capable of deceiving yourself in a way the others are not. Because for you, analysis feels like confrontation. understanding feels like resolution, and so you mistake the map for the territory. But no map has ever reached the living interior of the soul. You are the mapmaker of the abyss, the magician, but in shadow, not the one who transforms, but the one who performs transformation without undergoing it. You transmute pain into abstraction, grief into theory, fear into taxonomy. The alchemy looks real. The gold is hollow. And here is what this costs you in the place you least expect: intimacy. You have connections, intellectual, stimulating ones, but the kind of closeness that requires not just sharing ideas, but sharing the self beneath the ideas, that remains behind glass, always observed, never entered. You are one of the wounded souls who has made understanding a substitute for healing, and the distance between those two things is the whole journey. Integration for you is the most disorienting of the four, to discover that you are not your intellect, that underneath the frameworks is someone who does not know and cannot analyze and is simply human, frightened, wanting, real. The greatest intellectual act you can perform is to stop performing intellect. 4 types, 4 wounded souls, 4 completely different answers to the same unbearable question. What do I do with this pain that lives at the floor of who I am? None of them wrong, all of them incomplete. Here is what connects them. The wound is not the enemy. Your absorption, your mythologizing, your sealed fortress, your endless mapping, none of these are failures. They are the soul's genius. They kept you functioning. They may have even made you exceptional. But the soul that built the armor is not the same soul that needs to wear it forever. At some point, and this is what Jung called individuation, you have to turn around and face what you built your whole life to avoid. Not to destroy it, but to reclaim what is behind it. The wound faced is not a wound anymore. It is where the soul entered. Now I want to hear from you. Each of the 4 wounded souls we explored today carries a specific genius in shadow. Drop one word in the comments, the one that recognized you most deeply. Keeper, orphan, ghost, mapmaker. You do not have to explain it. The word alone will say everything. If this kind of depth is what you've been searching for, real Jungian psychology rather than surface-level content, I go much deeper on Substack. That is where I publish essays for the kind of inner work that cannot be fully contained in a video format. The link is in the description. And if you want to support the channel, the membership is open. Members get early access to selected videos, and more importantly, they help make sure this kind of work can continue. Because talking about the unconscious honestly, without the self-help packaging and without the academic distance, only exists if people who value it decide to support it. If that speaks to you, the link is in the description. And to everyone who found their way here, especially the deep souls who recognize themselves in these ideas, thank you for being part of this strange corner of the internet. I will see you in the next one.